In the Gospels, Jesus often spoke about something he called the kingdom of God, or as Matthew in his Gospel calls it, the kingdom of heaven. If you've spent any time with the Gospels, you will know that he returned to this theme again and again and again. Naturally, the people around him became curious. What kind of kingdom is this? They wondered. What is it? Where is it? What is it like? To help people get a glimpse of it, Jesus taught them using parables, stories that seem simple on the surface, but that open up profound truths about God, about ourselves, about the surprising ways that God works in the world. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, he once told them. It's like treasure hidden in a field. It's like a merchant in search of fine pearls. It's like yeast that leavens a batch of bread. Through these stories, Jesus invited people to imagine a world shaped not by power, ambition, or success, but by the surprising generosity and faithfulness of God. His parables often did two things at once. First, they challenged people to look a little more deeply at their lives and the world around them, and how they related to God and how God related to them, and how the ways of God were often not the same as the ways of the world. And at the same time, his parables comforted people with the promises of God, promises that were unfailing and unflinching. This is certainly true of the parable that we hear this morning, the parable of the sower. It is the first of 8 parables about the kingdom in Matthew's gospel, all of which we will be hearing over the next few Sundays. Each parable, in its own way, will comfort us and challenge us, and hopefully make us more faithful citizens of God's kingdom. As we heard a few moments ago, a sower goes out to sow seed. Some falls on the path and is eaten by the birds. Some falls on rocky ground and springs up quickly, but withers because it has no depth of roots. Some falls among thorns and is choked by them, and some falls on good soil, where it bears an abundant harvest. Let anyone with ears listen, Jesus said. This is a parable about what happens when the kingdom of God is sown into our hearts. Imagine the scene. Jesus is teaching by the Sea of Galilee, teaching to such a large crowd that he climbs into a boat while people gather on the shore. Looking out over that crowd, Jesus sees a mixed gathering of people. Some had probably come because they were curious to hear the latest traveling teacher. Others would be moved by what he said, but only for a time. When following him demanded something of them, they would drift away. Others would hear his words but become distracted by the ordinary concerns of life, by wealth, by ambition, by the pursuit of success. And then there would be those who truly received his word, allowing God's kingdom to take root in their hearts and to bear fruit in their lives. I sometimes wonder what it must have been like for those first listeners to hear these parables. What question did our parable today awaken in them about God, about themselves, about the kind of lives they were living? And I also wonder how we hear this parable and about the questions this parable causes us to ask about God and about our response to God and about how open our hearts and our lives are to God, and about how committed we are to following Jesus. Questions like, what kind of ground do we offer God to work in our lives? Are our lives a place where the kingdom of God can take root and bear fruit? Or is what we have to offer God rocky ground or thorny ground, ground that might even stifle the growth of the kingdom? Are we willing to follow Jesus as long as the going is easy, but less so when it gets tough? Do we hear Jesus' voice but get distracted by our own cares or ambitions? Or are we really able to listen and to hear what Jesus is trying to say to us, and able to make ourselves and our lives available to God? These are important questions for anyone who seeks to follow Jesus. They're also difficult questions because they reveal to us where it is we might need to grow. As I asked them of myself this past week, I could think of more than a few places where my own heart isn't fully open to God. Places where my commitment has grown a little cold. Places where my own ambition or desire for success has had more influence on me than I would like to admit. At the same time, I think these questions posed to us by today's gospel readings are not only about our own hearts and our own personal lives. They're also about the kind of communities we are creating, the kind of world we are helping to shape, and whether the values of God's kingdom are truly taking root among us. This week, in our country, we witnessed yet another killing by ICE. Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, mistakenly targeted by an immigration enforcement operation because he resembled another person ICE was seeking to detain. Whatever our views on immigration or border policy, the kingdom of Jesus asks us a deeper question. How do we see another human being? The kingdoms of this world are often built by drawing lines between insiders and outsiders, between those who belong and those who don't, between those whose lives are valued and those whose lives are easily overlooked. But the kingdom of God begins somewhere else. It begins with the conviction that every single person is made in the image of God. Every person possesses a dignity that does not come from a government or a document or a status or the approval of others. Every person is someone known and loved by God. Every person is someone for whom Christ died and rose again. And that makes me wonder whether the thorns Jesus speaks about are sometimes larger than the worries and distractions of our own individual lives. Sometimes fear can become a thorn. Sometimes indifference can become a thorn. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about who matters and who belongs can become thorns that choke the life of God's kingdom within us. Jesus does not ask us first to decide who is worthy of our compassion. He asks us whether we have ears to hear, whether our hearts are open enough for God's kingdom to take root in us, whether we are becoming people whose lives bear the fruit of the kingdom: mercy, justice, compassion, love. Thankfully, though, remember the parables of Jesus don't just challenge us, they also offer us comfort when we need it. And this morning's parable about the sower is no exception. In fact, there are two things that I notice about this parable that are comforting, at least to me. The first thing that comforts me about this parable is the sower himself. He scatters seed everywhere, not only on the good soil, but also on the path, among the rocks, even among the thorns. Any sensible farmer would know that that is wasteful. Why throw precious seed away when it has so little chance of growing? But God's generosity is not governed by our calculations. God is a God of promise and potential, a God who doesn't just plant seed where the soil seems right, but even on the path, on the rocks, in the thorns. A God who would plant 1,000,000 seeds even if just one of them would grow. The second thing that comforts me is this: Jesus never condemns anyone in this story. He describes the many ways people respond to God, but he never pronounces judgment. He doesn't shame those whose faith withers under pressure. He doesn't dismiss those who have become distracted by the worries of life. He simply tells the truth about the different conditions of the human heart. Perhaps those of us who imagine ourselves to be good soil are tempted to read judgment into this parable, but it's not there. What is there is Jesus asking us to recognize ourselves honestly, trusting that the God who scatters seed so generously has not given up on any of us. At the end of the day, what we meet in this parable is a God who sees the world differently than we do. A God who is richer in patience and mercy and compassion than we can imagine. A God in whose eyes and in whose heart no one is beyond hope or promise or potential. No one. A God who delights in wasting love on us so that in the end, not one soul will be lost. And if this is the God we worship, then this is also the kind of people God is calling us to become. People who refuse to give up on each other. People who refuse to let fear or indifference or the desires for comfort have the final word. People who look upon every human being as someone in whom God is already at work, someone in whom God is still sowing seeds for the kingdom. Because the fruit God desires from us is never simply a private faith. It is a life made spacious enough for God's kingdom to take root, a life that bears the fruit of mercy and justice and compassion and love. And the good news is this: the sower has not stopped sowing. Even now, God is scattering the seeds of the kingdom into our hearts and into our community and into this world. So may God give us ears to hear, hearts that are open, and lives that are ready to bear the harvest of the kingdom. Let anyone with ears listen